Share, and then I go to, where is it that? Right here. Now come on, share that. Okay, right. I think you could see that, hopefully, right?
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, let's just look this morning at the developmental stages. And in particular, we're talking about the Sigmund Freud's view of his developmental stage, which is generally termed psychosexual theory. And the reason for this is that Freud is heavily into urges and instincts. And so he starts out by reasoning that the child, in the very first couple months of life, any sensation about hunger, the child invariably places thumb in his or her mouth. And he'll continue to do that. And eventually, he wouldn't be getting anything from the thumb. And that would soothe him for a period of time, but eventually the hunger desire will still be there. So he gets the breast. Then he begins to learn how to work that, essentially. So he would be going between the breast and the thumb, whenever he has a sensation, basically. And some mothers would probably they have a nipple they give you can use early, okay? But at that particular stage, whatever the child gets will go into his or her mouth, whatever his hand can get to. Eventually that will happen. So Freud called that stage the oral stage. And that is basically, from the first year, actually. That's the way things are. And it's called it libido. Is basically everything centered around the mouth. And usually the oral gratification as well, and all of those is what the first phase. Everything goes to the mouth. Now, individuals who are stuck in that phase, Freud would say, some of the symptoms that you will see might be obesity, for example. Someone who, whenever they are anxious, whenever they are stressed, they're going to run to the refrigerator. They're going to eat. Also, Freud may argue and attribute cigarette smoking, for example, to that same fixation, where a person is stuck developmentally. And so the cigarette provides that. As a matter of fact, you would notice when someone starts getting stressed, they'll probably, if they're a smoker, they'll probably reach for a cigarette. People who tend to be excessively overweight might be considered to be stuck in that particular phase. So they eat a lot. Anytime they're stressed, they'll get up in the middle of the night, whatever it is, and they continue to eat junk food. And so you'll see a significant difference in the weight. So part of therapy in terms of dealing with a person with obesity, I think you're going to go back and you start tracking all of this and begin to get them to understand why they're eating, why they can't stop, basically, because eating becomes a coping skill to deal with stress, frustration, and anxiety. But after a while, though, that can become rather, because Freud is going to talk about, the conscious and the subconscious. We consciously get up and we consciously do things. But sometimes people may reach for a cigarette, or they may simply start eating, or as a matter of fact, biting one's nail, where it even becomes infected, because it's just an order, something you don't even think about it. And before you know it, you start biting your nails. And some people do it so badly that you can actually look at their finger and you can see it's almost sore, because anytime they get anxious, the hand goes directly to the mouth, basically. by the way, one of the reasons that the COVID is, some people do get COVID is simply because the hand, you touch something where the virus is at, and the hand invariably goes where? To the mouth. And so that is something you really need to pay attention to, because we tend to put our hands to our mouth without even thinking about it. It's like a subconscious kind of thing. You're driving, you're stressed, you're bored, and eventually your hand goes into your mouth and you start biting your nails until it becomes sore. Okay, so that's kind of where Freud might argue that that person is stuck in that developmental stage. Okay, so if I were to ask you, what are some of the symptoms that one might notice in an adult that might indicate, according to the Freudian schema, that a person is stuck? And what example would you give? And you can begin to think of some of those examples. Okay. And I mean, much of it really is just, if you think about it, it's kind of like, why would I be eating my nails? Certainly, there's no nutritional value in me, biting my nails, right? So if there are no nutritional value in that, why am I doing it? It has to be subconscious, isn't it? And we are stuck in that particular stage. Then, of course, there comes the anal stage, which is basically from age 1 to about age 3. And again, this is toilet training, and this is something that parents heavily engage in at that particular point, because the child do have biological urges. You got to go to the bathroom. The beauty about it is the child doesn't think about it. He just goes to the bathroom anyway. Okay. You and I have to get up and run and go to the bathroom. But there are some youngsters who may go well on into adolescence still wetting their bed. And that's kind of could be problematic. So that's that developmental stage. And then, of course, there is what he termed the phallic stage. And that stage runs from about age 3 through about age 6. And this is where Paul gets really fancy. Freud gets really fancy, about the Oedipus complex, where he talks about, the son wants the mother and envies the father, and the son wants to kill the father. I mean, it gets really, really, really fancy in this particular situation. There is some same-sex issues that do develop in this particular area. Once upon a time, homosexuality was considered to be a mental illness. It is no longer. It is removed from the psychiatric manual as a mental illness. But during, I think that was done probably back in I'm thinking either 1985 version. I think it's probably about the DSM-4. Homosexuality was changed from a psychiatric illness to be treated to an alternative lifestyle, basically. So that's some of the difficulties that occur during that particular period. Any questions?
So,
Sir. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe use one dog.
I didn't hear your question.
I was going to say something, but I thought that Ronald was going to say something first. So.
I actually repeat what you just said. I'm not hearing. You're going too fast. Speak slowly.
Okay, I thought that Brother Ronald was going to say something because I heard his voice.
Okay, I didn't hear you. So go ahead if you want to say something. He's not in the
Hello.
same. Go ahead.
So one of the things you have just said,
Yes.
regarding the honor period is biting one's nail. So I did not hear well what you were.
I was saying that when a person gets developmentally stuck in the oral phase, and they will continue to put everything in their mouth. So they will bite their nails. And you see a lot of adults do that. And they do it to the point where sometimes their finger starts bleeding. So that's that early stage that happens. And so also in the anal stage, also in the phallic stage, you know, it becomes a concern when a person's at that age still wetting their bed. They don't get up and go to the bathroom. So certainly that becomes a problem. And there are medications, of course, to help out with that as well. And then the next level, which is the latency level, which is really from ages 6 to 12, where, you know, Freud says the libido is quiet at that particular phase. You have a lot of psychic energy, is invested in schoolwork. Children tend to be a lot more active in schoolwork and play. And they also have a stronger connection to the same sex. You know, a lot of energy in that particular area. However, when you move to the next area, to the genital area, from ages 12, a person becoming, you know, sexually, they begin to acknowledge, to recognize their sexual development, puberty. It's usually girls may start seeing their period, you know, things start happening, they're maturing. They start thinking about sexual relationship. They start pursuing biological goal of reproduction rather. And there are a lot of discussions around that particular phase. Also, you know, there's a lot of teenage pregnancy too around that age as well. So the body's changing, you know, everything is changing at that particular point. At this particular point, though, you may start seeing some of the same-sex behavior in terms of, you know, gay and lesbian, you know, the sort of socialization. So at this particular stage, you may find boys who are gay most of their friends may tend to be girlfriends, you know, and the reverse is also true. So this particular stage really is a very very difficult stage, very confusing stage, very troubling time, basically for these young individuals. And so, like I said, the school kind of take over from the home in terms of peer relations, in terms of value systems. You know, kids at that point begins to challenge parental guidance and stuff like that. So you start seeing a whole different, you know, makeup start showing up. You know, when I worked in the middle school, you know, kids start dyeing their hair all kind of crazy colors. You know, a lot of mad things are happening. You know, boyfriend gossip is really heavy at that particular age. You know, it's a kind of a whole new world essentially that happens. So those are the Freudian kind of developmental stages. So in terms of Freud, you know, once you get stuck in any of these phases, it becomes problem. So a lot of sexual addiction, you know, Freud may argue, are coming out of this area. People didn't travel through that area successfully. They may not have traveled through that stages successfully in terms of their own sexual identity. They get stuck there. So the question then becomes whether homosexuality, whether or not it is a biological issue as opposed to a nurturing issue, a socialization issue. In other words, a person has to be socialized to become a gay or lesbian, as opposed to born to be a gay and lesbian. Now, it's interesting that by the time an individual here gets to, say, 16, 17, they may even start having discussions about changing their body through surgery. In other words, young girls at that age may decide that she wants to be a boy, so she may have her breasts surgically removed so that she can, now do that. So there is, because it raises a question about biological evolution. When I say biological evolution, do you know what I mean by that? Biological evolution.
No, sir, you would have to explain.
Right. It means that the body biologically changed with time. Okay. But it takes thousands. The problem is it takes thousands of years for that to happen, according to Darwin. I'm saying according to Darwin, right? So the question for you this morning, whether or not homosexuality is a biological issue as opposed to a social issue. You have to be socialized or nurtured into being a gay or lesbian. You socialize that way. And so it is a big issue today. And it is something that you may run into in terms of, counseling Christians in who may be gay, who may declare themselves to be gay or lesbian. And so the issue on the table for you would be, because they will be arguing that they were born that way. And so your discussion has to be addressing those issues. And especially if it's a case where the person has already done surgery, lady has had breast removed, the man is now taking certain medications in order to grow breasts, to be able to suppress hair in the face and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that they must do in order for those things to happen. So the question for you is, how do you address this? Of course, you can address it simply from the standpoint of the scripture said it is an abomination, period. But you can also, address it from a psychological standpoint. You can also address it from a biological standpoint and look at, have those arguments on the table. And one of the argument would be, is it a biological issue? Were you born that way as opposed to you was? For example, speaking in tongues, for example, and this is like a off, but it's just a parallel. I want to show you an example. In order for a person to speak in tongues, they have to have heard it at least one time. You can't just speak in tongues. When I say that, I mean like in the Pentecostal world. In order for you to actually speak in tongues, you have to have heard it. So that if you went to, say, Haiti, and you listened to someone speaking in tongues, and then you went to Russia, and you listened to someone speaking in tongues, you're going to notice that it's the same sounds. It is something that people hear and they pass on. And so the question then, when you come down to the gay and lesbian issue, is it a social learned behavior as opposed to a biological behavior? And I think the way it's going now, I think people are beginning to understand. I think the evidence are clearer, I think, just by virtue of how person are taking steps to do surgical operations and stuff like that. So it kind of discredit the argument that you're born that way, in a way, although it takes a lot to go down that road. Any question on the Freudian developmental stages?
Well, sir, it's not really a question, more of
Okay. Go ahead.
more of a comment.
Mhm.
I was interacting with a girl who once she got married to another girl, and I'm showing her where the Bible is concerned in Leviticus.
Yes.
That homosexuality is wrong, it's an abomination, and I have to teach her she's in the Church of Christ, but I think that she now get it that it's wrong, because she's saying that she and that person, they broke up like 2 years ago. So I'm like, all right then, maybe she's bisexual because maybe she like the both gender.
Right.
But I'm happy that she's with a guy now, because funny thing, that guy is in the church now. He's a preacher. You understand? So I think that she must have changed her ways. You understand?
So then the question comes down to motivation, the why.
Mhm.
Why people change? Is it because they feel that lifestyle was wrong, or why do people? Why did she step out of that relationship? Is it because there might have been other social problems, they weren't getting along, or is it because they come to the conclusion that the lifestyle itself is wrong?
Yeah, I think that the lifestyle itself is wrong, because she told me that her family they weren't into it. They never like it at all.
Well, the fact that the family didn't accept it is not I mean, I don't know, most families never accept it, but people don't get out of it. The question would be whether or not now she believes that it was a social, nurturing kind of thing she got into, but like you said, she may still be bisexual, but she's now married to this person she's dating, this man she's dating.
No, it's just her boyfriend.
Just a boyfriend now. So what, do they have plans to get married, or
Well, I think so.
okay.
I think so.
Okay. So that's a private challenge for them, though, to make sure that that's what they want, and that's what they firmly believe in. But the issue, I think, is that the society has changed, and therefore a lot of those behaviors are now sanctioned and made legal. So, and that's going to be a challenge, I think, within the church itself as the years to come. But as a young minister in the gospel, you're going to have to be dealing with that, on a regular basis. And that's one of those issues right there, and like you mentioned, people can be bisexual. What does that mean to be bisexual? And there has to be some level of discipline as well. And there's a term that you may want to just keep in the back of your mind, and the word is preference. My preference.
Okay.
You follow? Because when people start talking about preference, my preference is to be with a man, you see? And so the question then, what has happened is, in the United States, that it was a preference, and now they have legalized that preference. So what happens if my preference is to be with an animal, that I like animals, and that's my preference? Will society then legalize or acknowledge my preference? Or do I need to have enough people who have the same preference, and then society can say, well, we have, like 10% of the population, their preference is to be with animals. Therefore, we will now acknowledge that and now allow them to do that. Now, someone would say, no, that's ridiculous. That is like offbeat. That is not quite the same. The question would be, why is it not the same? I mean, two men having sex, why is it not the same? You follow? They would then argue because the animal can't consent. So is it a matter of consent? So we assume it's a matter of consent. Does that mean that a man who is, can then have sex with a 6-year-old? Then they will then argue that the 6-year-old do not have the right yet. That society then has to give so society can then lower the age, society can raise the age, you see, in order to make it. So the whole issue of preference doesn't work. So it comes back down to whether or not it's a biological. I was born a homosexual. Then if you were born that way, you would have had the plumbing. You follow? So if you don't have the plumbing, what evidence would you have to say that you were born, homosexual? Therefore, it has to be psychological. To the argument that I'm making?
Yes, sir.
If you say that you are homosexual, but you don't have the plumbing, then how do you know that you're a homosexual? It is because you feel it, because you're thinking it, and you like it, and you have a preference towards it. Therefore, that's a psychological process. It is not a religious process. It is not a biological process, right? If it was a biological process, you would have the plumbing. It's not a spiritual process because God created you, right? So if it's not the biological, if it's not spiritual, then it has to be psychological, which means it is social. Because it is the society, the environment that shapes the personality. Unless you happen to be in a church that is teaching that homosexuality is acceptable, then it is also spiritual in that sense, but it's also psychological. Follow? Because the churches can teach that. It is when the church teaches it, it becomes a social norm, not a spiritual norm. Let me ask you, do you understand when I say that it is not, if the church is teaching it, it's not a spiritual norm, it's a social norm? Do you understand what I mean by that?
When it comes down to homosexuality?
Yeah. If the church is teaching that it is correct, it is not a spiritual norm, simply because the Holy Spirit, for it to be spiritual, it has to be sanctioned and authorized by the Holy Spirit. So you can have a religious organization claiming that it is spiritual, but it's more social and psychological than it is spiritual. Because, and the reason that I'm saying that to you, because in the churches of Christ, there are now gay and lesbians who are now accepted within the churches of Christ in the United States.
They all what?
Huh?
I don't hear what you're saying. They all what? You say
I said that there are gay and lesbians that are accepted in some of the churches of Christ in the United States.
Really?
And this is not new, because I worshiped at a congregation where there were 2 gay men and they were leaders within the church. And that was probably about 1987. That's how far back that was, before some of you were born. These same guys went to another congregation in Pennsylvania and continued to be gay. At least one died last year. One of the partner died last year. But they were both active members within the churches of Christ. So I'm saying that this exists. And so you have to be able to understand that simply because a religious group may accept it, doesn't mean that it is spiritual. Refrain from putting a spiritual label on it. What it is a social arrangement with psychological implications in it. Because people are going by their feelings, their idiosyncratic needs and desires. And so that's how that argument, tends to be, because it's going to be something you're going to be dealing with on a daily basis. Well, not a daily basis, but it's going to be in your face all the time. Especially if you stay within the Christian community as a leader and as a teacher. So it's a challenge and something that you need to read everything that you can read on that, so that you'll be fully equipped to help a lot of young people, because there's going to be a lot of young people who are undecided which way to go. They're in that space right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to have to be able to give the guidance, because in the school system is going to say, whatever you think you are, that's what it is. Let's honor that. So it's something. So let's go to another. Let's see, how much time do we have?
Sir, yeah, we don't have any more time, right? Because
Okay, so we're done.
yeah, ready for 10
So
more.
when we come back, we will do this one right here, which is on the screen, and remind me that's where we will pick up. And that's a combination of Erickson, and I've combined Erickson with some of the other more general ones, and we will spend some time looking at all of those, okay?
Yes, sir.
No problem. Have a blessed day. So this is, let me see now. So the next class, I wonder if the next class is using the same ID, the Ephesians class. They're probably using a different ID, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Any of you in the Ephesians class?
No.
Okay, so let me exit here then.
All right.